Welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today, I'm really jacked up to introduce you to Catherine Brown. Catherine Brown, first of all, is the name of my first wife. Now, Catherine's not related to me, but anyway, it's an endearing name. And she spells it exactly the same. So that was kind of a neat thing. I haven't really seen the name Catherine like that. And it's kind of weird to start a podcast off and talk about that, right? But that's the way we are. Catherine, welcome.
I do hear mostly Catherine with a K, so that is interesting.
Yeah. So Catherine, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you chose to be on, and we're going to have a great conversation because Catherine comes from an area and she hangs out with business people talking about an area that's very dear to me, and that is sales. Sales is the scary thing that most businesses really struggle to get under control and get into a position of confidence. And so I noticed Catherine's content. She comes from StoryBrand land. I've met her through the StoryBrand Guide Network, and I've just watched some of her stuff, and I really relate. So Catherine, why don't you do this? Why don't you kind of give us a little backstory on you and how you stumbled into this scary, mean world of sales?
Okay, great. Well, I actually thought when I was in middle school and high school and all the way through college, I actually thought I was going to be a professional musician. I had taken piano initially, and when I got to middle school and you have to choose your extracurriculars, I chose band. And because I had played piano, I picked percussion because I could go right to the xylophone and marimba and all these things, and I had a good sense of rhythm, and I became a band geek. I did youth orchestra in high school. I really excelled and performed, and I actually went to study music in college. So I finished my degree and I thought that's what I was going to do, but I was almost finished with my bachelor's, and I realized that I just was not willing to practice as hard as what you have to do to get one of those very few orchestral percussionist positions. I just wasn't willing to do it. I liked it, but it was like a little bit of a later revelation that it was hobby land and not my profession. So my poor parents, I had a bachelor's degree in music, but they're like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And through temping out of college, I did all kinds of jobs. And I was interviewing and interviewing and interviewing. And one day I realized that the person who was doing the interview must have a fun job. And I thought, I could be a recruiter. I could learn to do this. So that helped me narrow my search because I was applying for everything under the sun as a person with no work experience, because I had done music festivals every summer since I was 11 years old. So I really had very little professional experience to draw on. And so I literally didn't know what I liked. But I started watching people and I thought I could interview people all day. So my entree into sales was actually as a technical recruiter. I had an entry-level position, and then my second job out of college was as a recruiter. And then I talked to that consulting firm into moving me into sales because I said, I think I'm selling already and I think I could sell for you. And that's how I made the switch. There was just a lot of people interviewing and getting to know people, and I like to travel. And at that time, there was a lot of jump on the plane and go present in person kind of selling, which I thought was very invigorating. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got into it.
So that gave you a lot of energy. So I have to ask this question. So did you have to stop saying one time at band camp when you were talking about examples?
I do have a special connection with people who were also band geeks. I mean, I sold the candy at Halloween for the fundraiser. I did the whole bit. I mean, I was in the pit, and I grew up in San Antonio, and I was at a super 5A high school. So, I mean, band was a big deal. And it wasn't actually that nerdy because football was such a big deal. So, we would travel with the team, and there would be big games, and we always went to at least the quarterfinals. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty nerdy, but it afforded travel, these camps, these opportunities. Also, what I never realized, Steve would serve me so much that was so useful was the practice of managing yourself when you're getting ready to perform. Because all those solos, all the concertos, all of the recitals, years and years and years of recitals, you have to master your own body and realize I have to get to a place where I can manage this, the physiological responses that I'm feeling, and decide that doesn't mean I'm afraid. It doesn't mean I'm unprepared. It means I'm excited, and figure out how to manage yourself. That is so much a part of public speaking or anything in selling when you feel anxious. Deciding what those feelings mean, assigning a meaning to them, and controlling your thoughts is such a big part of what's required. And I feel like I had a huge advantage because I had years of practice, even though I thought it was initially for a different purpose.
I love that because, I think of sales. If you could have a little outer body experience and kind of observe you in the conversation with the other person, it gives you a nice way to start to focus more on them, because we get so caught up in to what we're experiencing and where we're going to go next. If we could just exit our body a little bit and just calm down and spend more time learning more about the person that we're engaging, that would be so helpful. And so it's really cool that you bring that up.
Thanks. I feel like we saw that, especially even with the pandemic. So it's been several months, probably from the time you're going to release this podcast, maybe it'll be 6 months since we started to be in the new normal, whatever that means. And I think that part of people being so paralyzed in the beginning and not being able to pivot their business as quickly as they wanted was that they're inexperienced at managing and mastering their thoughts. And I don't say that in a conceited way, because it's really only been in the last few years that I have had as much language for that and practice with that as I have enjoyed since then. It is so important in selling that we understand which parts we can control and which parts we can't control. And one of the most important things to do is to learn to become a master of your own thoughts and your own behavior. That's what holds us back, right? We decide if we send a proposal to someone and they don't write us back, we start to let our mind go crazy and decide that means something. And all it really means, the only real data we have, is that they haven't responded.
Right.
We don't know anything else, really, but people will let their mind run wild and decide it means things and create a story around that. And then that will set you on a path that will affect your outcome, whether you realize that you are affecting the outcome yourself or not.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's interesting that you immediately saw yourself as, I could do these interviews, because really, the secret to sales, at least as far as my opinion is asking a lot of questions and letting the person that you're working with, helping them think through what their options are and getting comfortable and trusting you.
Exactly. I am in the process of putting a book together, and it was a really good experience for me to go back again and say, these key questions that are the themes that I teach around, are they still the ones I want to show? Or do I still think that they're the most useful? It's very interesting after so many years of selling for me to see that you really can come down to just a few topics. And so once you, Steve, or I, Catherine, decide, all right, I have to talk about the topic of how they're going to decide who to work with. Now, it doesn't matter if I'm working with an investment bank. It doesn't matter if I'm working with a fuel system manufacturer. These are all real clients I've had. It doesn't matter if I'm working with a set of medical clinics that have a membership program. It doesn't matter what I'm selling. I have to find out what's important to that buyer, and I have to ask the same kinds of questions in some way that applies in that industry and in some way that feels authentic to me. But somehow I have to find out how they're going to decide who they're going to work with. So that's an example of the topic that you have to address in the question is a principle. And then how you apply the principle is up to you. Right. So one person might say, they might literally say, how are you going to make a decision about who you'll work with? And someone else may say, that sounds too formal. I'm not going to say it that way. That's weird. I'm going to say, what's next in your decision process? Like, it doesn't matter. really.
Right.
What matters is that you get to the subject eventually. So I
Yeah.
really was always resistant when I was a sales employee and I went through other people's sales training programs. I was
Mhm.
always resistant when I felt like they were saying that the success depended upon me saying things exactly a certain way. People buck up against that. And I did too. My hackles got up and I was
Me
like a
too.
cat that was,
Yeah.
felt threatened. And I don't accept that now. And I don't instruct that way. And I don't encourage people that way. I say, here's some broad principles. And now let's write down and decide what your specific application is going to be for them, because I won't leave it up to you to just make up anything. I want to be a guide for you in this process, but you have a lot of flexibility about how you implement the principle. And it's very important that you own that and feel great about the way you say that. Otherwise, you won't do it.
I agree. I agree totally. I hated those scripts that you needed to follow. Not only does it feel insincere to you, it just feels insincere to the person that you're working with. And they feel like you're manipulating me because I know this is not what you're really wanting to say. You're following the script, trying to work me into a corner where finally I'm just going to go calf rope, where I'll make the purchase, whether it's best for me or not. I just need to get you off of me so I can go on with what I really want to be doing.
Mm-hmm. And now, because so much is over Zoom, or if you sell something, if you have any programs that can be purchased online, you might have reduced interaction with the actual sales call, right?
Hmm.
So it may be that some of the information you need, you find out because you have a great online form. It may be that you have an email exchange back and forth. It may be that I learned some key pieces I need to know in one call, but then in another we finish. It doesn't matter. I mean, we want to have efficient sales processes so that we close as quickly as possible, because we want to have a cost of sale that's commensurate with the size of the
Yeah.
deal, right?
Yeah.
But so when I say it doesn't matter, that's not completely true. It's important to be efficient, but what I mean is that you have tremendous flexibility person by person to be a good listener and let the conversation wander. And especially from their perspective, if they feel like they're talking and in the back of your mind, you realize this is great, I've learned so much, but we still haven't talked about money, then you need to bring that up eventually.
Yeah.
But you don't have to always lead with that or always ask it the same way. You have flexibility as long as you get to it eventually. I like to teach people to think about it kind of as a map. And as long as you check the boxes of all the steps in the
Hmm.
journey, eventually you can accomplish that many different ways.
Hmm.
And that people usually receive that well, because they don't want anyone to tell them anything that they think is going to sound robotic, because it goes to our deepest fear about selling, which is that we will be perceived as insincere.
Hmm. Let's talk about fear, sales fear. Reading some of the information that you sent me before this conversation, I was really relating. Most businesses, sales is like this icky thing we have to figure out a way to do. And so we're going to hire someone and just hope that they accidentally are good at sales and we don't have to manage them or whatever. But the truth is, that's we call that person like Superman, and that's just a fictional character. Why is it that businesses struggle so much with getting their act together with the sales process?
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, it's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Hmm.
I think there's a little bit of psychology, as there's probably 10 answers to this or 100 answers to this, but
Right.
one that comes to my mind is that part of our survival mechanism as people is that we're wired to remember negative things more than positive things. So I really believe that's a big part of it, because if you have ever been abused as a customer, which unfortunately every human
Everyone,
has been,
yes.
then you are anchored on that experience. And then what happens is, as soon as you're in a position to sell, you now have this anchor, literally psychologically, you have this anchor where you say, well, I don't want to be like that person. And then in general, it's human nature that we swing really far another way, because we tend to overcompensate before we find a happy middle ground, right? Think about whatever it is that a person's excited about, right? They have a new passion, and so they go all the way over here, and then it takes a while to settle into to a happy medium. And so I feel like most people have been mistreated and abused by someone, even though I am firmly convinced, Steve, that they've had overwhelmingly more positive experiences as a buyer than negative. They don't remember those. It's so sad. I think they're anchored on the negative. Then they overcompensate and they feel afraid. And so they underpromote as a result. I think that's a big part of it. One thing I'll do when I have big groups that I can poll all together. So now this is over Zoom, but it used to be in person.
Right.
I would usually begin a workshop with a quick show of hands. And I would say, would you raise your hand if when you were growing up, you thought you would be in sales? And most of the time there's no one. And what I have found that's interesting is if there are one or two people, they are usually a child of an entrepreneur, and they might have had or they belong to a family-owned business. So those are the only exceptions I can think of. Normally, I would say 95% of the time, no one raises their hand. And when they do, I always visit with them on a break and want to dig into their story more to understand. That's so interesting that you actually envisioned as a child that this was a worthy calling and that it would be something that you would grow into. Most people have an invention or a service, or even if they're not the business owner, they just need a job. And there's always entry-level sales openings since no one wants to do the work. And so 95% of the people I interact with, they fell into it. I kind of fell into it. It ended up being a great fit for me. But most people, even some who are full-time business development managers now, secretly feel embarrassed about the profession. And you and I were kind of kidding before we started recording the podcast, but that's why people will say things like consultant, or they'll say client advocate or customer. They'll even say customer service when technically that's not true. They actually don't sit on a help desk, right? They'll say that so they don't have to say sales. Or I think it's funny lately, even at the C-level in big companies, people aren't called vice president of sales as much as they used to. They are calling it chief revenue officer. Have you noticed that? I think that's really interesting. That person is over sales and marketing, but they're calling it a chief revenue officer, so that even the highest title that is about managing salespeople in a company, people are so loath to use that word. It's such a dirty word.
I know it is. But you think about, I think the thing that started clicking for me is when I looked at the positions I had as a salesperson, when I started looking at it as I'm actually managing a business within a business. I'm being a salesperson. Everybody knows when you're not hitting your numbers, everyone in the organization, including the folks at home. But when you are hitting your numbers, everybody knows. And one day it clicked, the business owner is the same way. Everyone knows if your business is, really sucking air, or if you're really doing well. And when I started realizing it, then I started managing, all right, so what are the areas I need to look at this? I'm investing some time here. Is it going to be a good payoff? That's when it started like really clicking for me. But I think it's something that folks that are naturally good at sales, they're entrepreneurs. And when they start looking at it that way, I think it can really help you. There's a self-esteem issue that you have to get past.
It's interesting you'd say that, Steve. There's, I've done a lot of reading about emotional intelligence because I have a lot of friends in coaching circles that will literally do the EQI 2.0 is an
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence assessment that they'll administer. And there is a good bit of research that's been done where this testing company will track people's vocation, and then they have mapped what are the aspects of emotional intelligence that show up over and over again in successful people in whatever field.
Mm-hmm.
So they've tracked salespeople as well as accountants, supply chain managers, business owners, all different kinds of things. Of course, I went right to the studies about the salespeople.
Yeah.
And there are several important characteristics that show up again and again in the most successful salespeople. And one is this concept called self-regard.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of self-regard is that it isn't an inflated view of self, but having high self-regard means that you actually have an accurate sense of your own strengths and weaknesses, but that you like yourself anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about being a narcissist, right?
Yeah.
It's saying, I'm good at this, I'm not good at this. But the higher the self-regard, the more, think about that, how in the concept in the StoryBrand world, we use the concept of guide.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea that we have been taught that the guide in a movie or a book is the strongest character. If you look at them, they're helping the hero who has a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to be true, the guide, think about all the guides that come to your mind in movies, they have pretty good self-regard.
Yeah.
They're pretty high self-regard. They like themselves as a person. They're flawed too. It's not that they're perfect, but they're stronger in their constitution than the hero is at that point when they meet.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking in a sales process, if you're focused on yourself and whoever that you're dealing with that's in that sales conversation, how they react to you can really mess with your emotions, right? But if you can back off a little bit and go, well, this is how they deal with this situation that happens to be stressful for some and not that stressful for others. But if we take it personally and we're all centered around and can't go, oh, well, that's how they deal with it. So this is what we ought to do. Let's back up, let them process this a little bit. And why are they reacting this way? Oh, they're not comfortable with this. Well, let's get them comfortable with that first. That's how they deal with it. Let's be their friend.
Right. It's so funny, right? Like the more insecure you are as a person, the more you think that everything is about you. I was reading an Instagram post recently, and it's a counselor I follow who I just think is brilliant. She has wonderful quotes and insights and has this huge following. Dr. Jen Hardy is her name. And she had this post that said, what would you tell your younger self? And you can only imagine posts like that. I mean, people were going crazy. And I was fascinated reading the comments. I don't often allow myself to get drawn in. This is on my own personal Instagram channel, and I don't make time for that during the day typically very much. And I was just engrossed in reading, oh my gosh, if you could only name one or two things, what would you say? And there were a lot of things along the theme of saying, it's not about you, or people are not watching you as closely as you think, and things that are about insecurity, youth, the insecurity of youth. So that I thought that was funny. I think another way that shows up that's ironic is that I tend to find my clients who sell something very complicated and very technical, in their nervousness, what they'll do is they'll go right to descriptions and forget why people really buy. And they will be very feature oriented. And it's funny to me, and I feel very fortunate that I get paid to work with people on this, because it seems evident to me, but it's not evident to them, right?
No.
It's just like whatever your circle of genius is, that's how it is, right? I'll listen to them tell me about conversations, and I'll have these moments where I realize, for example, I had a client that I had this conversation with very recently. I said, it sounds like you're doing a good job of reaching out to your clients during this pandemic and checking in with them, because these are farmers. They have big accounts that they sell to over and over and over again. It's just the kind of industry they're in. But there was just something that was nagging at me when I was listening to the way he was describing the conversations with his clients. And I had this this insight, and I thought, all right, I'm going to just take a chance and ask this. And I said, I think you ask a lot of questions about them, but I'm suspecting you don't volunteer very much about yourself. And these are farmer accounts. So what I mean by farmer account versus hunter, in that analogy is that if you're assigned or you cultivate and grow, you might have 10 major accounts you sell to over and over again, but you're not always doing a lot of new lead generation of account cultivation, right? That might be lots of sales positions are like that in corporations. And that was true for this gentleman. And I said, we have worked together for off and on for 2 years now. And I think about how little I know of you because you don't volunteer very much about yourself. And if these are your major accounts that you're building rapport with, they probably would appreciate if you would occasionally be more personable.
Right?
I hesitated to say it that way, but just be more personable and just offer how you're doing. Do you ever do that? Because people, it's the adage that people say over and over again, but I also firmly believe it. People buy from people they know, like, and trust. And if they don't know very much about you and you're supposedly in this long relationship, that feels weird. It feels incongruent. And with how much they're buying from you and how much they're spending. So isn't that funny that someone would pay me to do some sales coaching with them, and I would end up saying, be a friend, ask how they're doing, be a nice human, look for things they would enjoy. And when you're looking for ways to add value to their life and business and success, think about them like you would think of someone that was just a friend.
Yeah.
Right. What would you do for a friend? And the division in a lot of people's minds between this is professional behavior and this is personal behavior. I do believe that because of the internet, because of social media, because of all kinds of reasons, all the ways we market differently than when I started 20, 25 years ago, I do think that that's all blurred more now.
Totally.
And people have a different expectation about what they'll get to know about their salesperson.
I don't remember where I read this, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But if you could imagine that the person that you're wanting to establish this account with, if you were just sitting somewhere having a beer, with their family, how would you act and talk to them on the patio with the music playing? You wouldn't be formal. You would be, and they go, so what do you do, Steve? Well, we make these parts, and I just help set people up to utilize them really well. Instead of all the jargon and, it's like 5/8 inch and it's, whatever. That, I think that would really revolutionize. If there was one little thing that you could get someone to do, I think it would be that is what you're talking about.
Exactly. I do think, though, that just like in any subject, so my kids used to go to a school years ago that had these 3 distinct learning phases. It was just the way the school was structured. And so this language that we learned for that is they said that every subject a person learns in their life has a grammar stage to it. The idea is that in a grammar stage, that's where in math, you actually do have to memorize some addition, subtraction, and your times tables. And if you don't, it's going to come back and bite you in the rear end in trigonometry if you don't learn that, in second grade. Yeah. And that in spelling, of course, you have a grammar because you learn some basic spelling rules. So you learn I after E except after C when followed by a consonant, or whatever the rhymes are that help you remember the rules. I do think that there can be a grammar to selling that anyone can learn. It has been very interesting for me to write curriculum and say, what does that distill down to? What is that? And it's kind of shocking to me how short it is. And what I mean by that, Steve, is you initiate with someone or they come to you, right? So you have initiation phase, right, and you have some tools associated with that. How you get a meeting, making sure you drive to the next point, a little bit of basic qualifying, deciding if you're going to keep going. Then you're in the next phase. You're qualifying, you're interviewing the customer, you're qualifying, you're getting to know each other. Like you said, successful conversation is the prospect talking most of the time and you talking less because you're asking great questions. But the questions you ask, you can predetermine and they're finite.
Yeah.
So you learn those. You learn the grammar of that. You learn to write a proposal or write great draft statements of work and have a good call to action. You learn to close. You learn to bill people, and you learn to ask for a referral.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the tools.
Mm-hmm.
That's really it. And so if you learn that grammar, then you can be creative. So I think you and I are saying it's like having a conversation with someone having beer on a patio, but that's because we have some grammar for it.
Totally.
And so we can actually improvise, right? In a jazz analogy, it would be, I know all my keys, I know all my scales, so now I can improvise. You don't want to hear someone at a jazz bar who doesn't have that kind of mastery because it sounds like a mess.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to me that I think anyone can learn to sell.
Yes.
If they're committed, because it does not even require 10,000 hours. This is not even the Malcolm Gladwell rule. You can have an outline that you learn to follow, and you will quickly memorize the grammar. And when you have those steps memorized, then you can improvise and be relaxed. And this is not sending someone to the International Space Station. I mean, this is not as difficult as that. But because fear is wrapped up in this, and self-regard is wrapped up in this, and your powerful memory of your negative experience and not wanting to be like that sleazy, cheesy, whatever salesperson,
Mm-hmm.
that's what makes people think it's more complicated than it is.
Totally. I was watching, so I did an interview with Christopher O'Donnell. He's the chief product officer at HubSpot. Well, one of the interesting facts about him is he has this band called The Providers. And so I was looking at some of the videos on YouTube, and it's amazing how many downloads they have, but he's got his partner or is a bass player. And so he was teaching how to do bass, but he has this framework, and it's called you imitate, and then you begin to assimilate, and then you can create. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about here. Is it's exactly the same thing. First, you imitate the basic steps.
Exactly.
Then it starts to assimilate, and you've got the language, you've got your personality, you've got the way that you relate with people. And then over time, after you get a little bit more comfortable, you can be creative.
Exactly. Totally. Exactly. When my kids were in grammar school, they would learn these writing forms, and they would say, it was part of this idea about the grammar. You'd have these writing forms, 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 and you would imitate. And first you would just swap out some words, and then you would copy the form, slightly changing the story. And then it would grow. The philosophy of that particular type of training is saying, we really don't want your creative writing until you can do those other things.
Yeah. Because
it's a basis on which we build. And that can be up for debate of people, what people think about different educational philosophies. But I definitely think this applies to sales and marketing, right? That you can, if you know the basic, a couple basic choices of great sales emails, or building a marketing funnel, you can later be a genius and build on that knowledge. But at first, just copy what has worked for everybody else.
Serious.
Just copy, and that's what I've done at lots of stages of the business, right? Like, and I think it's funny that people think it's harder to learn to sell, and it's complicated because there's some emotional resistance there in a way that isn't true for some other business skills that people need to learn. I don't know that people have the same emotional baggage about learning to read their financial reports.
Right. So I think that business owners struggle with seeing this as a process that they can have an expectation out of that is realistic, instead of just this magic. I hope that we find the goose that finally starts laying the golden egg, and that's usually just run them through. Let's throw it against the wall, see what sticks. That's not good. But the other thing that was really, I think, something that really helped me was just starting to change your self-identity a little bit, and knowing that people appreciate a very nice sales process. They don't get it in all the other places. And what's the book? It's called, it's by the guys that, I'm sorry, I'm going blank on it.
That's
They
okay.
talk about the decision to do business with you, the success of everything, even after they become a customer, comes from the experience in the sales process.
Hmm.
And it, oh my gosh, I can't believe
Are you thinking about the
challenger
ex-
customer. The
oh, okay.
challenger customer. They talk
Okay.
about the challenger sale,
Yes.
but in the challenger customer, the experience in the sales process is where you can anchor someone for life.
Mm.
And I think it's because everything goes back to we're primal in nature. And our brains are deciding whether we're safe or in danger. And if we can create a sales process that makes you feel safe and in charge and respectful, and that here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure out if this is the best fit for you, subordinate to whether I make my quota or not, then you have just transformed every sales process they've ever been involved with.
And isn't it funny that at the same time, I want to make sure that our listeners get this. You can completely mean what you just said, where you can say, I'm doing my very best to do my diligence to lead us through a conversation where we see if it's in our mutual best interest.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, I'll modify my proposal or I'll give you a referral to someone else. And I completely mean that. And you can do that and still drive the process and be in control of the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are not mutually exclusive. They actually have to go together for high success.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I tell people, I figured out different email templates that have worked well for me across industries in asking for meetings with people. And I tell people, look, all 5 points of this email are important. But if you're going to pick and you're only going to remember one thing, the most important thing at the very, very end is for you to say what you're going to do next if you don't hear from them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you can say that in your own words. You do not have to say it. This is not magic. It doesn't have to be done only my way. But it's important whether you use the active voice or the passive voice, or you say you're going to call or email or text them or whatever you're saying is the follow-up. It's really important that you say, if I don't hear from you, I'll contact you in X time, this certain way to follow up. Because if you don't do that, you don't know if they did not get your message or if you should interpret the lack of information as disinterest.
Yeah.
Right? You just literally don't have. And when you say weak things like, let me know if you're interested, or I'll wait to hear from you, the problem is that you don't have a good filter to evaluate what the lack of response means. Perfect example of this. I have a friend that I'm going to do a workshop for her business. And for a variety of circumstances and variety of reasons, we have to do this over a weekend, which I don't mind. Sometimes I'll do that on a Saturday, for a friend, but we are having a little trouble aligning our schedule. I am very interested in doing this for her. And I woke up this morning and I thought, I forgot to text her back.
Mm.
I just forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Like my fact that I still have not written her back is in no way an indication of my commitment to do what I said I was going to do. I just literally haven't done it yet. And so it's so funny to me that on one hand, like to me, outstanding sales are these two things which to an inexperienced person might seem like they are in direct opposition to each other, but they're actually held simultaneously in balance, right? And that is, you have complete liberty to do whatever is best for you, Mr. Prospect or Miss Prospect. And I'll do my best to help you establish as quickly, as efficiently as possible if I am part of that equation or not. And if not, I'll send you on your way and I'll give you a referral, and we can maybe it'll make more sense in the future, which is why you want to have good marketing follow-up, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can be completely in control of that process and have a very strong sense of whether you'll win or not, because you did a good job managing the process without the person feeling managed. Isn't that crazy?
Mm-hmm.
But they're both possible, and people forget one at the expense of the other, or you're really floundering if you don't have either, right? And that's unfortunately true for a lot of people as well.
So let's talk about quotas.
Okay.
I think quotas are what's wrong with sales. I think quotas establish an immediate antagonistic objective in a sales conversation, because the salesperson is incentivized. Look, I got to make my quota. So whether this is a good fit for you, I'm sorry, I have to make my quota, or I need to quickly discern whether I'm wasting my time with you and move along, because I got a quota to make and I'm going to be held accountable. And I think it's just an unenlightened way for someone who maybe doesn't understand sales to try to manage sales the best they can. And I think it just immediately sets the organization with the wrong focus. I'm curious about how you feel about that.
When you say quota, do you mean activities that are being tracked, or do you mean ultimately the amount of revenue that they have to be brought, that has to be brought in?
So that's my point, is I think that most business people, they have to wear all these hats. And even if the sales hat fit them, well, I don't know. I think the ones that enjoy it, love it, and wear it and own it, and wear a t-shirt that says I'm sales or whatever. But most of them, like, this is another thing I need to kind of get some control over. I'm got HR and I'm trying to manage these people and get these orders and negotiate a sale, purchase or whatever. And then, oh my gosh, our sales are lacking. We need more sales. Quotas. Let's just hire the 5 guys and give them some quotas and let's see who makes it. I think that it just sets that you'll never get out of that short game solution, is what my thoughts are. Does that answer your question?
Well, most people have a fear of scarcity, so it could set you up for a lot of self-defeating behavior if you're scared all the time that you're not going to hit that number, right? I think a place that, and I've never seen anyone do this well, but I'll tell you, in my perfect world where I think it might work, if you were such a great manager that you learned how to have a goal setting framework where you aligned and you worked with the person to coach your salesperson to have their personal and professional goals be aligned and understand how to work backwards, that hits a company goal, and you were that explicit about numbers that way, it might be fine, because they would be motivated by, if they have goals that really resonate with their really deep self, then they would create plans that break down into regular habits that would actually get them there. But the problem is that managing salespeople it's done so poorly. I have done it poorly in the past. It's really such important work, and it's done so badly because the sales manager, think about, people joke, I'm sure you've heard this before, people joke about saying, what's the worst thing you can do would be to promote your highest performing, highest commission earning salesperson and make them a manager over everyone else, right? It's a common business owner mistake that people do that, thinking that they will naturally be a good teacher, or that they love their other coworkers that much that they want to spend all their time. Because I really do think it's a special calling. I think it's important to have great managers at every level, but not everyone likes managing people, right? So finding that right person who can make the people above them happy and communicate the goals and implement a strategy, but be so in touch with every person that they understand what motivates that individual, and that they're helping that person fulfill their calling, whatever they think that is, personally and professionally. There's so much research that's in leadership development and goal setting and habit formation that hasn't made its way into the sales world. And you see people starting to do that a little bit more, but I have made some individual goal setting a part of a broader package when I have sales coaching that goes along with curriculum I've taught. And I have been astonished at how meaningful it's been for people to break down and say, let's say their professional goals. I want to pay off this certain debt, and my wife really wants to do this trip. Or I had a guy I worked with last year, and he loves soccer. He's an American, but he follows all these European soccer leagues. And he wanted, for a big birthday that was coming up, he and some friends wanted to go and go to the World Cup in person. Mm-hmm. And so it was just amazing how much energy was generated inside himself, right? With just having this abundant, excited, purposeful goal, which he needed to sell a lot to make a lot of money to justify that trip according to his family, right? But he did it, right? He did it. Now, me as an outside person helping him think through that, I mean, the company paid me to help him figure that out, but I think, what if every person who managed a salesperson approached another in that way, where you say, what is it for you? I mean, I don't want to go to the World Cup, and I barely want to watch soccer on television. So that wouldn't be the right goal for me, but I could tell you what makes my eyes light up and what makes me get more excited and what would make me translate that energy into specific revenue generating activities that would help me hit my numbers.
Yeah. From that energy, he was able to help him look at it as a business. And so if we want to achieve this, then that means this activity needs to be in place, and we need to have this many conversations. And what are we going to do to create that many conversations? Then we can kind of strategize how we'll do those conversations better. Yeah.
Because that kind of energy unlocks creativity. Oh. And one of the loveliest thing, I think in the sales and marketing world, we see people be creative all the time, and we literally either are also graphic designers or we know designers. And so we're around people who self-describe as being artistic creatives. But most people in selling don't think of themselves that way. Most people think, I sell this manufactured product, right? Or I sell insurance, or I sell contract CFO services. And they don't actually see themselves as someone who can apply what I would say is that just their God-given, by design, creative ability to the service of others. It just does not even cross their mind. Mm-hmm. So that's a fun discussion to have with people and say, creativity can manifest itself in the way you put the offers together, what you say when you speak with someone, what you say when you write to someone, the creativity you use in reaching out to someone. I read years ago about a guy that was wanting to get a sales call at a big corporation and was constantly being stopped by this executive's assistant whose job was to be a gatekeeper, right? Yeah. And they tried all these different ways. Somehow he learned where the guy really lived, and he sent a box to the guy's house, and it was a box of cereal. And on the box of cereal, he put a letter that said, I'd like to catch you before you get to the office in the morning, or something like that. Now you might say, okay, that's creepy to figure out where he lived. Fine. You have to admit it's pretty creative, and that everybody can do really just this unlimited number of, they can have an unlimited number of ideas. Yes. If they are encouraged to do that, inspired to do that. So when I need selling ideas, one of the things that's been a hack for me that might be interesting to your listeners is that I will often listen to podcasts, TED Talks, interviews of other people, and people who are completely outside my industry.
Totally.
It's actually making the jump from applying from this to this that will get me interested. And then and then the other thing is just to give myself more white space, right? That
Yeah.
usually when I take a walk every day and I go walk my dog, I never talk on the phone to friends. I don't multitask. I really try to just walk her, enjoy her enjoying herself, because if you want to sniff everything in the world, I mean, that's the way they experience the world. So she is just having the time of her life, on our walk. I'm enjoying watching her enjoy herself. And I'm just letting my mind wander.
Yeah.
And giving that white space. I'm just amazed what will come to me, but you have to be deliberate about making a way for that to happen. And in the busyness and hecticness, or being worried about scarcity, or being worried about hitting your quota, those are actually self-defeating things that don't serve us.
Totally. So, Catherine, this has been an excellent conversation. I hate that there's so much that we could talk. Maybe we should have a couple more conversations, but a sales series or something. But if someone is interested in learning more about you or connecting with you, how do they find you?
Thank you. So my website is the best place to go to start with, and that is extraboldsales.com. And on that, I have a tab called Free Stuff, and I have some great, they were originally blog posts that have now been turned into PDFs that you can download, but they are some of my most popular little mini teachings that you can see if to get a flavor of the way I talk, the way I write, the kinds of tools I suggest people have. And if you do that, you would begin to get my Friday email. I send a Friday email out every morning at 7 Central Time on Fridays. And I usually share between 2 and 4 paragraphs of sales tips and little mini lessons. Sometimes there's a call to action to something I'm offering. Sometimes it's always just great free information. And that's probably the best way to see if my combination of the psychology of selling and the actual writing of the sales tools is a good fit for somebody.
Awesome. So have you landed on a name for your book?
I haven't. I'm having such a hard time.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea?
Well, I don't know. Tell us a little bit.
So I did do a walkthrough with my writer that's helping me put it together, and I'm really excited. It's actually going to be relatively short, and I think that's important for a first time author. This will be my first book, and so I believe it'll just have 7 chapters. It's not long, but so my idea is always, would you read it? Could you read it on a transcontinental flight?
Yeah.
Could you read it in one sitting? And I think that's a nice measure. But I mean, it's pretty how-to. Like, even though I teach pretty equally about the psychology of selling and how to write templates and tools and guide the conversation and have a strong call to action and those sorts of things, it's pretty heavy on the latter. It's pretty heavy on the tools part. And that's interesting for me once I put it all together to see that. So, I mean, I might use how-to in my title. I might say, how to sell without acting like a jerk, or how to, how to have confidence in selling, something that is really getting at the fact that I think it's almost going to be like a dummy's guide. I hesitate to say it that way because I don't want people to feel like I think they're not smart, but very instructional with templates, things you fill in the blank. I hope very practical.
Cool. Well, the golden toilet's already taken. So. I was just thinking, like, how to admit to everyone you meet you love to sell. Something like that. The essence of sales is like, you almost have to like, hi, my name's Steve and I'm a salesperson.
It's like going to AA.
Kind of, yeah. Like Sales Anonymous.
Yes. Yeah. What's funny, I did think at one point about something like sales is not a 4-letter word, and that's taken.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. I mean, the concept, it's like other sales trainers know that most of the world hates selling. We just haven't figured out how to come together and lead a revolution that is for everyone's good. I mean, what would it be like if people saw it not as a disgusting necessity, but as this way that you connect people to products and services that help them live the kind of life they want to live. That's really what we offer.
Mhm.
But it takes a fair amount of practice for a person to really believe that.
Totally. Yeah. Sales is actually 2 4-letter words. Hard work.
That's right.
A
That's right.
salesperson is just Airbnb. We're connecting inventory with demand. And everybody's like, oh, Airbnb or Uber or whatever. That's all we're doing. We're connecting resources with demand. We're connecting
Mm-hmm.
solutions with people who want solutions.
Right. And if you don't want to take that trip right now and it doesn't make sense for you,
Yeah.
then I'll stay in touch with you and give you value and give you great content and some free information in the meantime. And when it makes more sense, then we do something.
Yeah. I
Right. Which
love
is
that.
how Uber and Airbnb think of it.
That's
Right.
totally true.
So
This has been excellent conversation. So Catherine Brown, extraboldsales.com. You need to listen to her stuff. You have a podcast coming out as well, right?
I do.
Do we
I
have a
do. I'll
name
give you
yet?
the show notes when we're very close. I don't have
Okay.
a name quite yet. In the meantime, I do have an Extra Bold Sales YouTube channel that's got some videos on it, that has some training videos on it. I do hope I'll have an interview format in the near future where I'm talking to people about the work that they did to change their mindset about sales, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that people need tools like that. They want to know, what do I say to myself? What do I write to myself? What would it mean to practice building habits of getting better at this? And so I'll keep you apprised of that.
Do that. If someone has a great name, let Catherine know.
Please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Steve.
Catherine, for
Thank
being on the
you.
ROI Online Podcast.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap.